So we've seen in the Incarnation a strange analogy with the way in which nature works in this pattern of descent and reascent in the union and mutual constitution of opposites. And the objection then has come to us, maybe this analogy is too close. Maybe it's kind of like what Voltaire said when he talked about man being created in God's image. He said on the sixth day, God created man in his own image, and man was so tickled by the compliment that he returned it and created God in his own image. Maybe this is a creating of a God in the image of nature. Maybe what we have here in the Incarnation is just a supreme nature religion. Isn't Jesus just another corn king? Isn't he just another Osiris or Adonis? Some of you who might have studied some Egyptian religion realize that Osiris was the god of the underworld and the dead, but also the god of fertility and regeneration, precisely because Osiris, as the king, was killed by his brother Seth and cut into many pieces. And then his wife, Isis, brings those pieces together and mummifies them and then brings him back to life. And it is in this story of the death of Osiris and the resurrection that we have the regeneration cycle in the Nile. And every time the Nile rises and refertilizes the land, Osiris is supposed to rise from the dead and be in the land of the living. And every time the winters come and the crops fail, then Osiris dies again. And this is your typical fertility mystery religion, where you have the rising god that fertilizes the crops through his death and resurrection every year in the cycles of winter and spring and summer and harvest and so forth. Why isn't this just the supreme kind of nature religion? Well, what we have then, here's a question, right? Which is the real and which is the imitation? Which is the original and what's just an imitation? And Lewis says there's three ways to tell this, whether Jesus was the original versus whether he was just an imitation. Now, we got to understand that Christianity arises at a time when mystery religions are all in the vogue. You have Mithraism, you have Osiris, Isis, you have the Greek mystery religions, the Orphic religions, all of them having this same kind of pattern. And so you would think then that as the followers of Jesus go into the Roman world to spread Christianity, and the New Testament documents are written, side note, most of them are written at the time when the religion is spreading to the Gentiles, not to the Jews, but is making its appeal to pagans, you would think that this then would become a very respectable way of framing the religion. But when you read the New Testament documents, you find only two references to the seed planting, dying, and raising analogy. Only two in the entire New Testament. Two parables, and they occur in Gospels written specifically to anti-naturalists. In other words, if this is an imitation, and there's already this antecedent standard, the imitation would naturally appeal to the more respectable type and say, listen, we're just like that. But that doesn't happen at all. There's almost no reference by Jesus or the New Testament writers to these analogies. Why would that be the case if it was imitating? It was imitating something very respectable. It would make the religion more appealing to pagans, but there's almost no reference at all to it. But moreover, there's something even more peculiar about thinking this is an imitation. An imitation would arise in a place where it would be amenable to it. But where does this idea occur? It occurs among a people that are the most anti-naturalist in the world as far as their religion is concerned. Judaism was a sacrificial religion, but it didn't sacrifice in order to bring the crops up. Only two types of sacrifices were made in Old Testament religion. One on behalf of sin, to get forgiveness for sin, and the other for what is called thankful. So in other words, the religion of the Jew, Yahweh, was not a nature God at all. He wasn't the soul of nature. He didn't live in nature and need to be brought out or coaxed into making the crops fertile. He was the creator of nature, and nothing needed to be done for nature to do what it was supposed to do except to be in relation to God and to follow moral commandments. There was never this idea of the need to bring God into nature and allow thus this nature God to have its power activated or stimulated by sacrifices and ceremonies. Judaism is the least naturalistic religion in that area. And in fact, you might say in many ways, it condemned the nature religions, it condemned the fertility sacrifices, it condemned the temple prostitutes that were supposed to recapitulate the fertility cycle in humans that would then take place in the crops. And so thus, very interesting, this story of the Incarnation, this claim arises in an anti-naturalistic environment, anti-nature religion environment. That makes no sense if it's an imitation. But what's the strongest portion of Lewis's argument is actually this idea of that imitations don't illuminate the original illuminates the imitation. Think about a copy machine. In the old days, the copy machines were such that they didn't make copies that were identical to the original. And therefore, you could always tell the original from the copy. Why? Because the copy could have smudges on it. The copy could have failed to get every letter of the text. And so if you only had a copy, it was never as good as the original. And you could tell the original from the copy because the original could illuminate the discrepancies in the copy. The original letters were clear enough that where the copy was unclear, the original could illuminate the copy. Lewis is claiming that what? That the Christian story of the Incarnation is such that once you understand its full significance, you're going to see it illuminates nature. It doesn't merely affirm the facts of nature. It sheds light on why these facts of nature are facts of nature. And therefore, if that's the case, then you have a better case that the Incarnation story is a story about what is originally in God and therefore occurs in what God creates, nature, as an image of that pattern that's already in God, rather than us creating God in the image of nature. Another way to put it is this. If you look at nature religions, they just merely affirm the facts of nature and then recapitulate them, just make them and act in the manner that nature does. But when you look at Christianity and the story of the Incarnation, it not only affirms the facts of nature, it seems to perfect them and purify them in a way that sheds light on them. You can't really understand the full force of this until we finish this story of showing how the analogy with nature works out. But once you see this, and you see how nature then becomes this portrait of God, then it will be clear how nature is illuminated by the Incarnation rather than the Incarnation being an image of nature. So next we will go to how indeed this descent and reascent affirms another characteristic of nature and sheds light on it.